Welcome to NAWB Live at the Forum 2022. This is Deb Giordano with Equus Workforce Solutions, and I'm joined by our first guest today, Jake Hirsch-Allen with LinkedIn. Good morning, Jake, and welcome.
Thanks so much, Deb. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
It is great to be here, isn't it?
In person.
Exactly.
IRL.
So, Jake, for our audience, could you share a little bit about what you do at LinkedIn?
Absolutely. My role sort of evolved over the past few years to really focus on workforce development. We never had somebody in a commercial role focused on this area. And what I was excited about a few years ago was to begin developing public-private partnerships, agreements with organizations like Equus and with governments and workforce boards, really right across this continent to figure out how they could use LinkedIn's talent solutions, so the same tools that recruiters, staffing firms, HR organizations use to recruit, to train, to figure out how their companies and labor markets work, and then apply those same tools, in this case, to workforce development, to figure out how to get underemployed job seekers or unemployed job seekers into the workforce, how to get them the skills they need, and even understand which jobs would be the best fit for them based on our analyses of skills, and provide that technology, provide that data, and even that learning content to job seekers and to the organizations that support them nationwide.
That's phenomenal, Jake. Let's talk about some of the technology that LinkedIn provides, because you guys have really evolved to meet the market need out there.
Absolutely.
So can you talk a little bit more about specifically how that technology
totally.
supports?
I mean, it's funny because when I talk to most people, they think of LinkedIn.com. They think of a social network or maybe a professional network. But practically speaking, before I've worked at LinkedIn, so I've been there for about 7 years, but almost 10 years ago, we began developing custom software specific to, for instance, recruiters. We began figuring out how do you use not just LinkedIn.com, but rather the data behind it in order to match people to jobs more efficiently. And so what we've begun doing is taking that same software and instead of providing it to a recruiter, offering it, for instance, to somebody in career development so they can figure out which companies are hiring, what skills they're looking for, and then also find the individuals who already have their hand up on LinkedIn saying, hey, I'm looking for a job, or they're just scrolling through the feed and indicating to us that they're interested in certain industries or certain skills. And then we can either provide them those skills via things like LinkedIn Learning, which we're of course working on with Equus, or even match them to employers so that a business developer will use that same recruiter platform on LinkedIn and identify somebody in HR at an employer who already has said on LinkedIn that they're looking for hiring, a specific type of individual, and they can facilitate that matchmaking, the handoff between somebody in career development and somebody in business development, all on LinkedIn.
That is phenomenal. You guys also have the keys to a ton of data about the workforce today. What is that data telling you? Anything that, we think it's obvious. People talk about the Great Resignation, the big shift, but I'd be really fascinated, given the market that you guys tap into, what the data is saying.
Totally. It's actually a particularly interesting time, I think, for LinkedIn's data because unlike most labor market information, we have both the supply side, so we have the individuals who are applying for jobs who are on our network, as well as the demand side, in part as a result of relationships with other national organizations like NOB. So for instance, we have a relationship with NASWA and specifically the National Labor Exchange, wherein all of those jobs on every public job board in America are also represented on LinkedIn, and we send traffic, more traffic in fact than anybody else, back to those job boards. So those are the two sides of our labor market information. And broadly speaking, what they're saying about the labor market is both what the public data is saying, that it's the tightest labor market ever, that employers are really looking to employees for the first time and they're in the driver's seat because employers can't find enough people for the jobs that they've posted. But also I think there's some more sort of granular LinkedIn specific information. So for the first time, we're seeing trends very clearly ahead of time that we never saw before in areas like sustainability. Greening jobs, we're calling them, not necessarily jobs that are sort of in the actual green or solar panel sustainable economy, but rather all the jobs around those areas, all the jobs necessary to transform an entire industry, let's say in Texas or Alberta, Canada, where I'm based, and move them into other areas. Well, the social workers and the economists and the folks who are broader engineers not related to sustainability, all of those fields are growing pretty rapidly. And while, for instance, in that area there isn't a massive mismatch now, that's one of the areas working with organizations like the International Labour Organization where we very much foresee a big gap, a big shortage, and therefore we're confident in sort of making that recommendation that one should be reinforcing the skills, the training, the transformation of industries into greening jobs.
Right. So let's talk about skills a little bit.
Please.
You guys have LinkedIn Learning, this huge library of courses. How many courses do you have?
18,000, something like that.
And I always love to talk to you about what are the courses that people are really migrating to? What's catching people's attention
That's a
today?
great question. In some cases, they haven't changed ever. And when I say that, I mean ever. And that's in part because sort of the human skills, people used to call them soft skills, others people are calling them durable skills, and I sort of like that term because I do think over time they have maintained their relevance. The ability to communicate, to think critically, to be creative, those are the skills that are never going to go away.
Right.
So we actually have a lot of content on those skills. My favorite examples are like Richard Branson on entrepreneurship or Oprah Winfrey on communication. Both the star power but also the universal relevance of those skills makes those courses always sort of top hits for LinkedIn Learning. And then there's specifics, interestingly related, for instance, to our parent company, Microsoft, that have also maintained their relevance on the technical side. So Microsoft Excel, the number of jobs that require Microsoft Excel knowledge or expertise is mind-blowing, particularly for somebody who's always been terrible at numbers or spreadsheets. But it's remarkable what percentage of jobs at one point or another will require at least a basic understanding of how to use a spreadsheet. And so again, the Excel courses, even the career development basics, like how do you dress for an interview, or what are the skills necessary in having a professional conversation, those are relatively new skills for many American job seekers. And so it's useful for us to start with the basics, third grade education and up, and then progress into the Python or how do you become a software developer or something courses.
I remember when we talked last year, Jake, we also talked about the incredible interest in the DEI courses, and I know LinkedIn Learning is playing a major role in working with employers and job seekers to really help foster a diverse workforce. Talk to me a little bit about those trends.
It's interesting because I spend most of my time focused on the same things that we focus on here, getting job seekers into employment. But the vast majority of folks using LinkedIn are actually on the employer side. And again, I think that's quite useful for workforce development because most people don't have that perspective in this room, right? They have the perspective, again, of the job seeker or somebody trying to help them. And so to have a company where 90-some% of our data, of our employees are focused on employers and really reflecting what they need back to the labor force is useful, for instance, even in terms of the content that we create.
Right.
So as an example, all of the courses on LinkedIn Learning are the result of our economic graph, our sort of analysis of the economy from a labor market information perspective, and specifically the skills that employers are saying they're demanding. And as you said, one of the skills that they're demanding the most is around diversity, is around how do we hire to ensure that our workforce really reflects the workforce of society, of our economy. Because we know at this point, and there's both lots of data on this as well as a bunch of great real-world examples, the companies that do reflect the labor market more will be more productive. The people who work there will be happier, even their customers will be happier. I mean, it's remarkable how if you can both align the demographics but even the purpose of employees and their company, the companies just do a better job. They work better. The economy works better. And so I think that realization is being reflected in the content that's being consumed by the folks in HR, even the senior leadership that have been both taking and assigning courses on things like diversity, inclusion, equity. And in fact, they're breaking those up, right? They're now thinking about, okay, just from an inclusion perspective, what is the content that we need to learn in order to develop leadership styles, for instance, that are more inclusive, that take into consideration different learning or communication or acting styles.
So, Jake, LinkedIn is obviously worldwide, right?
Huge.
Anything interesting you want to share about kind of that the U.S. could learn from some really cool things that are happening elsewhere?
Totally. I mean, in many ways, my perspective is not necessarily that just of LinkedIn's data, but also of somebody working in workforce development and sort of doing a lot of comparative analysis in that respect. I'm based in Canada. A lot of the lessons, I think, in North America that we've learned, for instance, recently about work-integrated learning or work-based learning, in America they're often called apprenticeships, but that's really just the most formal end of the spectrum, wherein people are getting experience while they're learning with an employer, real world experience, and it could be a little project, right? There's like all of these tech companies like Ripen and Parker Dewey that are doing a great job of allowing people in class, in school, to begin to explore what it's like to work with an actual company, with an actual organization, do little projects, it could be 5 hours of work. And yet, to the extent that those projects involve real-world skills with somebody who could hire those individuals, it gives them a huge leg up on somebody who's just done academic work, who's just watched online learning.
Right.
And so it's that combination of real-world experience with online learning that we think is going to be one of the crucial means by which we can close the massive gap, particularly in America's labor market. I think when you look at other labor markets, people said, for instance, up in Canada, we didn't even go through a great resignation. Relatively speaking, and this is true for many European countries, the government supported enough of the labor force that it actually, the market sort of remained tight right through a pandemic, even if you sort of included people who just weren't working for a long time. And now the real challenge is instead to get the kind of growth that we were seeing pre-pandemic out of the labor force or a labor market that's much, much tighter.
Wow, great. Well, Jake, thanks for joining us here
My
at NOB Live at the Forum, and thank you, audience, and have a great conference.